Diatonic versus chromatic. So we talked about major and minor scales and keys, and diatonic is music that's clearly in a major or a minor key. The melody and harmony firmly rooted are in the key, and the centers on tonic and its related harmonies. Baroque and classical era music is largely diatonic, meaning we can hear that this is in a specific key. However, when you get to Romantic era music and more and further on, chromatic music is more used. So it uses all the 12 half steps. It doesn't just stick with the basic notes. So for example, this would be an example of diatonic. A scale, or whoops. Let me try that again. The Google Edit thing was getting in my way. So that was an example of something that's diatonic. An example of classical music would be, let's use Mozart, because Mozart is a, so I was playing this a lot with you guys. This is symphony number
You could take the treatment of your ulcerative colitis in a different direction.
A very, very famous Mozart piece, and you can hear that this particular piece is set up in a minor key. There's no question what key this is in. Very clear. There's no question that this is an example of diatonic music. It's very clear what key this is in. When you start going up further into music and you start getting to the Romantic period, which Brahms is a definer of, it kind of gets a little bit harder because they start dabbling in chromaticism or adding those half steps that we talked about consonance and dissonance. They added more dissonance and things like that. So I'm going to give you an example of this is Romantic music, and then so see how it's totally different from what Mozart. You can tell it's a clear key. I don't know if you could hear what the strings were doing, but they were throwing in a lot of dissonance there. There's an example of some chromaticism being used. So that totally took a drastic turn from what the established tonality was a minute ago. So that's an example of being more use of chromaticism. Then you go even further into modern music, or even, actually, let's use Stravinsky because that's even better. And Rite of Spring is the perfect example of that because it's very, very, very dissonant and uses...
Does Nissan Titan have everything you're looking
ads
for
everywhere,
in a truck?
man.
Maybe you should check out Ford F-150s.
So that gives you an example of dissonance and using that chromaticism in more modern music. So you can see how this sounds way different. It's experimenting with those other half steps. It's not using a strict progression. It's kind of unsure of what the tonality is There's no like fixed center of pitch. So that would be an example of chromaticism and diatonic. You can have other types of scales. We have the pentatonic scale or 5-note scale that's in a lot of folk music, Native American music, African and Asian music. Tritonic, which is a 3-note pattern in African cultures. Microtones are when I was talking about earlier about the intervals smaller than a half step. That's a microtone. And that is used a lot in Indian music. So I can give you, or in Arabic music too. So I can give you an example of that. It's really, really cool. So this guy is playing some. So you can hear there's like notes in between that he's playing. Kind of sounds out of tune to some people because there's notes in between the melody. So that's a microtone. That's tones in between half steps that are used in Arabic music and Indian music, more of the Eastern music. We don't use it that often. Cool. All right, so we use the major and minor system in Western music. Active chords are always seeking resolution. Triads, remember, 3 notes built on scale steps. We talked about tonic. It's the first note of the scale, and we had talked about dominant. It's the 5th note of the scale, and we use those to build tonality in our system. The next one that we use is the subdominant. So we have tonic, which is built on the 1st note of the scale, dominant, which is built on the 5th note of the scale, and the subdominant, which is built on the 4th note of the scale. And we use 1-5-4 all the time. It's in every pop song, any worship song. If you can learn the 1-5-4 of anything, you pretty much have learned any key or any song out there. I have a really funny video I might show you guys in class. If we don't have time, I might show you at the end of this lecture, or I'll post it on Canvas, that talks about 1-4-5 and how it follows us everywhere. The subdominant chord, if you use this type of progression, so going from 4 to 1, it's the Amen that you hear at the end of a lot of hymns, and that's what that progression is. So I don't know, might make some of you excited about that next time you go to church and you're singing and you hear that. The key is what establishes the tonality. It's the key, ha, to music tonality. And it uses these 3 chords to provide that musical unity, 1-5-4, and everything. So you can change keys, which is modulation, and there's also transposition. Modulation is a complete shift to a different key during a composition. Complete shift. It changes keys. It's when somebody changes keys and you're like, oh, that person just changed keys. That is a modulation. That's what that means. And transposition is where in the work there is a new key, but I'm sorry. When you take the entire piece of music and then you set it in a new key that's different from the original key, that's a transposition. So I'll give you guys an example of that. Let's go over to our Norton Digital and see if they've got anything for us there. No, they don't. So I'll give you an example of modulation. So this happens within the piece, and Sousa is the perfect example of this. So this is Stars and Stripes Forever. You hear this a lot around.
During his tenure as lead host, one has.
We'll zoom in here.
And his story, it officially became our.
So they start in a key, also hear the 1, 4, 5 in this because that's what he used. So it'd be like the 5. Going back to the 1. So we're still in the same key, but in just a little bit we're going to modulate or change keys. In the second section. So you can tell complete shift to a different key. And if you were looking at a piece of music, it would have changed. It would have notated to you that they were going and shifting to a different key. So that's what an example of modulation. Transposition is basically changing the entire piece to a different key. So if the original is in one key and then you change it to another. So that's chapter 4. It kind of gives you a in-depth look at some more elements of music, and we'll be looking at chapter 5 next.